me the sharp dad.
Nurse, please, my daddy, he's bleeding. He's not waking up. The scream tore through the emergency hallway like glass breaking. For a second, just a second, everything inside Houston Medical Center stopped. Footsteps paused. Monitors continued their quiet beeping. A gurney rolled halfway down the corridor, then halted. And there she was, a tiny girl standing near the entrance of the emergency ward, breathing fast, too fast. Her little chest rising and falling like she had been running for miles. Her hands were trembling. One shoe was half untied, and there were faint smears of blood across her small fingers. She looked around the room, eyes wide, desperate, searching for someone, anyone, who would listen. Please, she cried again, her voice cracking. My daddy, he fell. He's outside. He won't wake up. Now, before we step further into this story, let me say something quickly. Welcome back to Mr. Austin Love and Story Tales, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable stories. The kind that make you pause. The kind that stay with you long after the story ends. And, well, tonight's story, it begins with a child who refused to give up. But let me ask you something first. Have you ever wondered what happens when two completely different worlds collide? When strength meets pain? When pride clashes with compassion? When secrets from the past refuse to stay buried? What happens when a man who has spent years hiding from the world suddenly finds himself depending on the kindness of someone he doesn't trust? And what happens when that kindness, slowly, begins to change everything? Well, that's exactly the kind of story we're stepping into today. But before we go any further, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoy powerful storytelling like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. It really helps YouTube push these stories out so more people can hear them. Alright, now, take a breath with me for a second, because what that little girl did next, it changed several lives forever. The little girl stumbled forward a few more steps, her breathing uneven, sharp, like every breath was fighting its way out of her chest. Please, please help him, she cried again, her voice trembling. Several nurses turned at once. One of them pushed a cart aside quickly. Another doctor stepped out of a nearby room, confused, but no one moved immediately. Not because they didn't care. No. It was the shock. Children didn't usually run into emergency rooms alone like this. The girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving another faint smear of blood across her cheek. Daddy said, he said if something bad ever happens, I should find help, she muttered, her words stumbling over each other. Her voice dropped suddenly. He's not waking up. For a moment the hallway grew strangely quiet. You could hear the soft hum of machines, distant footsteps somewhere behind the reception desk, a quiet cough from the waiting room, and then a chair scraped against the floor. Someone finally stepped forward. It was Nellie. Nellie had been standing near the nurse's station reviewing a patient file when the shouting began. She had seen frightened people before, panicked families, crying parents, but something about this little girl, something about the way her voice kept shaking. It didn't feel like confusion. It felt like pure fear, real fear. Nellie slowly set the file down on the counter. Well, all right, she whispered under her breath, already moving. Her shoes tapped quickly across the tile floor as she approached the child. The girl looked up the moment Nellie reached her. Her eyes were glossy with tears. But she was trying, really trying, not to cry. That alone made Nellie's chest tighten a little. 5 years old. Maybe younger. Nellie crouched down gently so they were face to face. Hey, she said softly, raising her hands a little so the child wouldn't feel cornered. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe here. The girl shook her head quickly. No. My daddy's not safe. Her voice cracked again. He fell down. and there's blood, and he won't talk anymore. Nellie inhaled slowly. Something in her stomach dropped just a little. She kept her voice calm. "All right, slow down for me, okay?" she said gently. "Tell me where he is." The girl lifted her small arm and pointed toward the hospital entrance behind her. Her finger trembled as she spoke. "Outside." A pause, then a whisper that barely made it out. "By the road." For half a second, no one spoke. Then Nellie turned her head sharply toward the nurses' station. "Trauma team, outside now," she called. The shift in her voice snapped the room awake. Chairs moved. Shoes hurried across the tile floor. One doctor grabbed a medical bag from the counter. Another pushed open the emergency doors. The sound of rushing footsteps filled the hallway. Nellie stood quickly but kept one hand lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Stay right here for a moment, okay?" she said softly. But the child shook her head immediately. "No, I have to go with you." Her small fingers grabbed the edge of Nellie's sleeve. Nellie hesitated. The fear in the girl's eyes wasn't fading. If anything, it was growing. "Well, all right," Nellie murmured quietly. "But you stay behind me, okay?" The automatic doors slid open with a soft mechanical sound. Warm Texas evening air rushed inside. Sirens echoed somewhere down the street. Faint, but getting closer. The group stepped outside into the ambulance bay, and that's when they saw him. A man lay on the concrete near the edge of the parking lane, flat on his back, one arm stretched awkwardly beside him. Dark blood had already soaked through the side of his shirt and spread across the ground beneath him. For a moment, even the doctors slowed. "Gunshot wound," one of them muttered under his breath. The man's chest moved faintly, barely, just enough to prove he was still alive. Nellie felt the little girl press against her side. "That's my daddy," the child whispered. Her voice was so quiet now, it almost disappeared into the night air. One of the paramedics dropped to his knees beside the man. "Pulse weak," he said quickly. Another doctor carefully lifted the edge of the shirt, then paused. Bullet entry, right side of the ribs. A short breath left his mouth. "Well, I'll be—" He stopped himself. The doctor looked up toward the others. It missed his heart. A heavy silence settled over the group. By inches, maybe less. Behind them, the girl squeezed Nellie's hand tighter. Is he gonna wake up?" she asked softly. Nellie looked down at her. For a brief moment, she didn't answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know yet. Stretcher. Move, move. The calm of the evening shattered instantly. Two paramedics rushed forward with a rolling stretcher, its wheels rattling sharply across the pavement. "Careful with his side," one of them said, kneeling quickly beside the injured man. Another doctor pressed thick gauze against the wound. Blood was still seeping through the fabric of his shirt. Not pouring, but steady enough to make everyone move faster. "Sir, can you hear me?" the doctor asked firmly. No response. Only the faint rise and fall of the man's chest. The little girl shifted nervously beside Nellie. Her fingers tightened around the nurse's hand. "They're helping him, right?" she asked quietly. Nellie gave a slow nod. "Yeah, they are," but her eyes stayed on the doctors. One of them carefully rolled the man onto his side. Another slid the stretcher beneath him. "All right, lift." The team raised him together and placed him onto the narrow bed. The wheels locked with a sharp click. Inside. Now, they pushed the stretcher quickly toward the emergency doors. The girl suddenly pulled her hand away from Nellie. "Daddy." Her small legs tried to run forward, but the stretcher was already moving fast. The doors opened. Doctors and nurses surrounded the bed as they rushed down the hallway. Machines beeped. Voices overlapped. Blood pressure dropping. "Get the trauma room ready. Prep oxygen." The girl stopped just inside the entrance, her breathing becoming shaky again. For a moment, she just stood there, watching them wheel her father away. Then her voice came out again, soft this time, almost like she was afraid to say it too loudly. "Daddy." Nellie walked up behind her and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she said quietly. The girl turned slowly. Her eyes were glossy now, filled with questions no child should have to ask. "Is he gonna die?" The words hung in the air between them. Nellie inhaled slowly. She had answered that question many times in her career, but hearing it from someone this small, it hit differently. She crouched down again, lowering her voice. "Hey, listen to me," she said gently. "Your daddy's strong, all right?" A small pause. "We're going to do everything we can to help him." The girl studied Nellie's face carefully, like she was trying to decide whether to believe her. After a moment, she nodded once. Just once. But she didn't let go of Nellie's hand again. And down the hallway, doctors were already fighting to keep her father alive. The trauma room doors swung open hard. On 3, "Move him over." 1, 2, 3. The team lifted the injured man from the stretcher onto the hospital bed. Bright surgical lights snapped on above him. The room filled quickly with controlled urgency. "Cut the shirt." A nurse grabbed medical scissors and sliced through the blood-soaked fabric along his ribs. More red spread across the gauze already pressed against the wound. "Pressure's unstable," another nurse said, glancing at the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. The steady sound of the heart monitor echoed through the room. One of the doctors leaned closer, carefully inspecting the wound. "Entry point right here, lower rib." He pressed gently around the area, watching the patient's breathing. Then he paused. Well, that's something," he murmured quietly. Another doctor stepped beside him. "What is it?" The first doctor exhaled slowly. "The bullet angle." He pointed carefully. It traveled sideways, barely missed the heart. A brief silence filled the room. "By how much?" someone asked. The doctor hesitated, then answered softly. "Maybe an inch." Another pause. "Maybe less." The team immediately moved again. "Prep him for imaging. Get more fluids in. Let's stabilize him first." Outside the trauma room, the hallway felt strangely still compared to the chaos inside. The little girl sat in a chair beside the wall, her legs swinging nervously back and forth. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. Nellie stood nearby, watching the closed doors. After a moment, she crouched beside the child again. "Hey, you doing okay?" The girl shrugged a little. "I think so." Her voice was small again now, quieter than before. Nellie offered a gentle smile. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl looked down at her shoes. "My daddy calls me Bam Bam." A tiny pause. "Everybody calls me that." Nellie's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Bam Bam. Huh." The girl nodded. "He says, when I was a baby, I cried really loud." For the first time since arriving, the child gave a small, shy smile. Then the smile faded again. "My daddy never cries, though." She looked up toward the trauma room doors. "He's really strong." Nellie followed her gaze. Well," she said softly. "That's good." A quiet moment passed between them. Then Nellie asked gently, "Bam Bam, how did you know to come here?" The little girl sniffed slightly and wiped her nose. "I called 911 first." Nellie blinked. "You did?" Bam Bam nodded. "My daddy taught me." Another small pause. "He said if anything bad ever happens, I should always ask for help." Her voice grew softer again. "And I ran here too, just in case." Nellie didn't speak for a moment. She simply watched the child sitting there, 5 years old, scared, but brave enough to save her father's life. Yeah, that kind of courage didn't happen by accident. The trauma room doors finally moved again. Not fast this time. Slowly, with a quiet mechanical click. Nellie looked up immediately. Bam Bam did too. A doctor stepped out, removing his gloves as he walked into the hallway. His shoulders looked tired. The kind of tired that comes after a fight that could have gone either way. He spotted Nellie first, then the little girl beside her. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just inhaled slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. Nellie stood. "Well?" she asked softly. The doctor rubbed the back of his neck. Your dad's a tough man, he said, glancing down toward Bam Bam. The girl straightened in her chair immediately. Is he awake? The doctor shook his head gently. Not yet. Bam Bam's small shoulders dropped. But the doctor crouched down slightly so he could speak at her level. Hey, listen, he said carefully. That bullet came really close to his heart. Bam Bam's eyes widened. The doctor continued quietly. If it had moved just a little differently, well, he paused. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. But it didn't, he added quickly. And right now, your dad's still fighting. A small breath escaped Bam Bam's lips. Not relief exactly, but something close. Can I see him? She asked. The doctor hesitated. Not yet, kiddo. He stood up slowly. We're moving him into recovery first. Bam Bam nodded, though it was clear she didn't like that answer. The doctor gave Nellie a quick look. He's stable for now, he said quietly. But we'll need to watch him closely. Nellie nodded. Understood. The doctor walked away down the hallway, leaving the two of them sitting there again. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Bam Bam leaned gently against Nellie's arm. Not fully, just enough to feel someone beside her. Moments like this, they change people. A child doing everything she could to save her father. Running through the night, calling for help, refusing to give up. And, well, let me pause the story right here for a second and ask you something. If you saw a child fighting this hard to save someone she loved, would you help her? If your answer is yes, go ahead and hit the like button on this video. It might seem small, but it really helps YouTube share stories like this with more people. And, trust me, this story is only beginning, because the man fighting for his life behind those hospital doors, well, he wasn't just a farmer, and the reason someone tried to kill him, that part of the story is far more complicated. The hallway slowly settled again. Doctors passed by from time to time. Nurses whispered to each other near the desk. Somewhere farther down the corridor, a machine beeped steadily. But around Bam Bam and Nellie, things felt quieter, like the world had taken a small step back. Bam Bam's legs were still swinging gently from the chair, back and forth, back and forth. Nellie glanced down at her after a moment. You're pretty brave, you know that? She said softly. The girl shrugged a little. My daddy says I worry too much. Well, Nellie gave a small half-smile. Tonight, that worrying helped him. Bam Bam looked down at her hands. They were still a little stained with dried blood. Her fingers rubbed together slowly. I didn't know what to do at first, she murmured. Nellie didn't interrupt. She just listened. Bam Bam continued after a small pause. He was fixing the fence behind the house. Another pause. Her voice grew quieter. I was drawing pictures on the porch. Nellie nodded gently. Go on. The girl sniffed slightly. Then I heard a loud noise. Her tiny shoulders lifted a little, like when a balloon pops. But louder. Nellie's eyes shifted slightly. A gunshot. Bam Bam swallowed. I thought Daddy dropped something. Her voice wavered. But when I ran back there... She stopped. The words seemed to catch somewhere in her throat. Nellie waited. Didn't rush her. After a few seconds, Bam Bam tried again. He was on the ground. Her breathing grew uneven, and there was blood on his shirt. She wiped her cheek quickly with the back of her hand. I tried shaking him. Another pause. But he wouldn't wake up. Nellie felt her chest tighten a little. Bam Bam looked up at her. But Daddy told me something before. What was that? Nellie asked quietly. The girl took a slow breath. He said, if anything bad ever happens, don't try to fix it alone. She hesitated. He said to find people who can help. Nellie nodded. That's good advice. Bam Bam sniffed again. So I ran inside the house. Her fingers twisted together again. I called 911 like he showed me. A faint breath left her mouth. And then, I kept talking to them until the ambulance came. Nellie studied the child's face carefully. 5 years old, and she had handled a moment most adults would freeze in. After a moment, Nellie asked gently, Bam Bam, did you see anyone else near your house? The girl frowned slightly, thinking. Her legs stopped swinging. Well, a pause. I think I saw a car. Nellie leaned forward just a little. What kind of car? Bam Bam shook her head slowly. I don't know. Then she added quietly. It drove away really fast. Something about that answer made Nellie's stomach tighten. Because accidents didn't usually drive away. The hallway clock ticked quietly above the nurse's station. 10 minutes passed. 20. The rush of activity from earlier had faded into the steady rhythm of a hospital night shift. Nurses moved calmly between rooms. A janitor pushed a cleaning cart slowly down the corridor, and in the chair near the trauma wing, Bam Bam's small body was beginning to droop. Nellie noticed it immediately. The girl had been trying so hard to stay awake. Every time footsteps echoed down the hallway, Bam Bam lifted her head quickly, hopeful. But nothing changed. Her father was still behind those closed doors. Still unconscious. Still fighting. Nellie crouched beside her again. You feeling sleepy? She asked softly. Bam Bam rubbed one eye with her tiny fist. A little, well. Nellie glanced around the quiet hallway. It's been a long night. The girl nodded slowly, then leaned sideways in the chair, just slightly, like she didn't mean to, but her shoulder rested against Nellie's arm. Nellie didn't move, didn't pull away. Instead, she adjusted her position so the girl could lean more comfortably. For a few moments they sat there in silence. Then Bam Bam spoke again, her voice softer now. Miss Nellie? Nellie blinked. How did you know my name? The girl gave a tiny shrug. I heard the doctors say it. A faint smile appeared on Nellie's face. Well, that's some good listening. Bam Bam looked up at her. You're really nice. Nellie chuckled quietly. Don't tell the other nurses that. They think I'm strict. The girl giggled faintly. Then, her expression turned thoughtful again. Miss Nellie. If my daddy wakes up. A small pause. Can you tell him I tried really hard? The words came out fragile. Careful. Like she didn't want to cry again. Nellie felt something warm twist inside her chest. She gently brushed a small curl away from Bam Bam's forehead. You don't have to tell him, she said softly. Why? Because when he wakes up, he's going to see you sitting right here. Another quiet pause. And he'll already know. Bam Bam seemed to think about that. Then slowly, very slowly, her eyes began to close. Her breathing softened. Within a few minutes, she had fallen asleep against Nellie's arm. Nellie looked down at the child resting beside her, 5 years old, brave enough to run through the night to save her father, and now sleeping in a hospital hallway, waiting for him to wake up. Nellie exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. Outside the hospital windows, the Texas night stretched dark and still. But somewhere behind those trauma room walls, a man named Hale was fighting to stay alive, and neither he nor the little girl sleeping beside her had any idea yet that the gunshot outside that farm was not the end of their troubles. In fact, it was only the beginning. 6 years earlier, Washington, D.C., the city was quieter after midnight. Streetlights reflected softly against wet pavement from a recent drizzle, and the distant hum of traffic echoed between tall buildings that never seemed to sleep. Inside a modest apartment several blocks away from the Capital District, a man stood near the window, still, watching. His eyes moved slowly across the street below, studying the sidewalks, the parked cars, the dim alley across the road. Not nervously, not exactly, just carefully, like someone who had spent years learning how to notice things most people ignored. His name was Hale. Back then, people in certain circles knew that name. Not publicly, not officially, but quietly. Tern worked in a world that rarely appeared in headlines. A world where information traveled through encrypted messages, where meetings happened in quiet corners of foreign cities, where mistakes could cost more than just a career. He had been recruited young. Sharp mind, steady hands, a man who didn't panic when situations turned complicated. And complicated situations were the only kind he ever seemed to get. Most of his assignments involved travel, different countries, different names, different identities. Sometimes he stayed somewhere for weeks, sometimes just hours before moving again. The work demanded precision, control, and distance, especially distance, because attachments made the job harder. That had always been the rule. No deep friendships, no family ties, no relationships. Those things created weaknesses, at least that's what the instructors said during training. Tern accepted that rule early. He wasn't a cold person, not really, but he had learned how to lock certain parts of himself away. Lock them tight, mission first, always. That night, he stood quietly in the apartment kitchen, pouring a cup of black coffee while reviewing a small tablet resting on the counter. A file scrolled across the screen. Coordinates, names, schedules. He studied the information carefully, committing the details to memory the way he had done hundreds of times before. Then he sighed softly. "Well, that's tomorrow," he murmured. His voice sounded almost unfamiliar in the quiet room. Most of the time he worked alone, which meant conversations like that one usually happened with no one else around. Tern leaned against the counter and took a slow sip of coffee. It had grown slightly cold. He didn't seem to notice. Somewhere deep down, a small part of him had started feeling something recently. Not fear, not hesitation, something closer to exhaustion. Years of operating under secrecy had a way of building invisible weight. The constant awareness, the constant caution, never staying in one place too long, never trusting too easily. Most people would have walked away from that life eventually. But walking away wasn't simple. People who knew too much didn't usually get comfortable retirements. Tern understood that better than anyone. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly, then glanced at the tablet again. A new assignment, another mission, another city, another identity waiting to be used. He didn't know it yet, but the next mission would introduce him to the one person capable of changing everything he believed about that life. Her name was Sard, and meeting her would quietly begin the end of the man he used to be. 2 days later, a quiet cafe sat near the edge of Georgetown, its windows glowing softly against the evening air. Inside, people chatted over coffee, laptops open across small wooden tables. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Exactly the kind of place intelligence agencies like to use for brief meetings. Tern arrived early. That was another habit training had carved into him. He always preferred observing a location before anyone else involved in the meeting arrived. He chose a seat near the back corner, where he could watch the entrance clearly. 1 cup of coffee. No sugar. He placed his phone face down on the table and leaned back slightly in the chair. Waiting. Minutes passed. A group of students walked in laughing loudly. A businessman stepped up to the counter. A couple near the window argued quietly about something on a phone screen. Then the door opened again, and the woman who stepped inside immediately caught his attention. Not because she tried to stand out. Actually, the opposite. She moved with quiet confidence, scanning the room with calm eyes that seemed to measure everything without making it obvious. Her posture alone told him something important. She had training, real training. The woman approached the counter first, ordered a drink, then turned toward the seating area. For a moment, her gaze swept across the room. Then it stopped. Right on him. A small pause. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for 2 trained operatives to recognize each other. She walked over slowly, set her drink down, and sat across from him without asking. "Well," she said calmly, adjusting the sleeve of her jacket. "You must be Hale." Tern studied her for a moment before answering. "Depends who's asking." The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "Fair enough." She extended her hand across the table. Shard. Tern shook it. Her grip was firm, steady. Most field operatives gave off certain signals once you knew what to look for. Alert eyes, balanced posture, an instinctive awareness of surroundings. Sade carried all of that naturally, but there was something else too. Confidence. Not arrogance, just quiet certainty. "So," she said after a moment, glancing toward the window, "I hear we'll be working together for a while." Tern leaned back slightly. "That depends on how long the assignment lasts." She chuckled softly. Optimistic." A short silence followed. Then she tilted her head slightly. "You always this serious?" "Usually." "Well," she said, taking a sip of her coffee, "we might need to fix that." Tern raised an eyebrow. "Is that part of the mission?" "Maybe." Her tone was playful, but her eyes remained sharp, studying him just as carefully as he studied her. Right then, neither of them realized how much time they would spend working side by side in the months ahead. Long nights analyzing information, long flights across unfamiliar countries, assignments that demanded complete trust, and slowly, almost quietly, something unexpected would begin forming between them. Something their line of work had always warned them to avoid. Not yet. But the first spark of it appeared in that cafe, right there between two operatives who were supposed to remain nothing more than partners, and neither one of them realized yet that their partnership would eventually lead them somewhere far more dangerous than any mission. The first assignment they shared began 3 nights after that cafe meeting. A grey sedan rolled quietly through the streets of Washington, its engine humming softly as it passed beneath long rows of streetlights. Inside the car, Tern sat in the passenger seat reviewing a small device in his hand. Sade drove, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear shift. She looked relaxed, almost casual, but her eyes moved constantly, mirrors, sidewalks, intersections, watching everything. You always this quiet before a job?" she asked after a few minutes. Tern didn't look up. "Usually." "Well," she said lightly, "that's comforting." He finally glanced at her. "You prefer talking during missions?" "I prefer knowing the person beside me isn't planning to disappear mid-operation." Tern exhaled slowly. "I don't disappear." She replied, raising one eyebrow slightly. "Your file says otherwise." That made him pause. "You read my file." "Parts of it." Another short silence settled inside the car. Then Shard chuckled softly. "Relax," she added. "Half of it's redacted anyway." Tern shook his head slightly. "You talk a lot. Someone has to." Despite himself, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. The car slowed as they approached a parking structure near a federal office complex. Shard pulled into the entrance and guided the vehicle up one level. "Target office is on the 3rd floor," she said quietly. "Security rotation every 15 minutes. Tern nodded once. "I'll handle the entry, and I'll make sure no one interrupts you." She parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Shard glanced toward him again. "You trust me yet?" Tern opened the door. "Let's see how the mission goes." The operation itself lasted less than 20 minutes. Clean, efficient, exactly the way assignments were supposed to run. When Tern returned to the car with the encrypted drive they had been sent to retrieve, Sade was leaning casually against the hood, pretending to scroll through her phone. But when she saw him approaching, she slipped the device into her pocket. "Well?" she asked. "Done." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That fast? You sound disappointed." "No," she replied, sliding back into the driver's seat. "Just impressed." As the car pulled out of the garage and merged back into the city traffic, Said glanced sideways at him. "You know, you're not exactly what I expected." "What did you expect?" She thought for a moment. Someone colder. Tern looked out the window. The lights of Washington moved past slowly. Well, don't get used to anything. Shade laughed quietly. But something about the way she studied him afterward suggested she wasn't finished figuring him out. And over the next several months, assignment after assignment brought them together again. Different cities, different identities, different operations, but always the same partnership, the same quiet trust forming between them. Slowly, carefully, until one day they realized something neither of them had planned. They worked better together than anyone else in their unit. And somewhere along the way, that professional respect had begun changing into something else. Nearly a year passed. Dozens of operations, countless flights, long nights studying reports and intelligence briefings. By then, Tern and Sade had developed a rhythm. They rarely needed to explain things to each other anymore. A glance, a gesture, a short sentence. That was usually enough. But something else had begun changing too. At first it was small things. Details inside mission briefings that didn't quite line up. Assignments that seemed unnecessary. Targets who didn't match the usual profiles. One evening, they sat inside a secure conference room reviewing their next operation. A large digital screen displayed satellite images and location coordinates. Sade leaned back in her chair slowly. "Does this one feel strange to you?" she asked. Tern looked up from the tablet in his hand. "Explain." She pointed toward the screen. "The targets, a journalist." So, our division normally handles foreign intelligence threats." She tapped the table lightly. "This guy writes political articles." Tern studied the file more closely. She wasn't wrong. The assignment felt misplaced. He looked toward the closed conference room door. Orders came from above. "Yeah," Sade muttered quietly. "That's what worries me." Tern didn't respond immediately. He had spent years following instructions without questioning the bigger picture. That was how the system worked. But lately, he had started noticing the same inconsistencies she had. Small patterns. Decisions that didn't align with the organization's original mission. Sade folded her arms slowly. "Tell me something honestly," she said. "All right. If we walked away tomorrow, do you think they'd let us?" The question lingered between them. Heavy, Tern leaned back in his chair. "Well," he rubbed the side of his jaw thoughtfully. "That depends. On what? On how much they think we know." Sade nodded slowly. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then she exhaled quietly. "You ever think about a different life?" Tern raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know," she said with a small shrug. "A place that doesn't require aliases." A faint smile crossed her face. "Maybe somewhere quiet." He studied her expression carefully. "You planning something?" "No," she replied quickly, then paused. "Not yet." But that conversation planted a seed, one that would continue growing quietly in both of them. Because once you begin noticing cracks inside a system, it becomes impossible to ignore them. And as the weeks passed, those cracks became harder to overlook. Assignments grew more questionable, requests more secretive, until one night, Sade said something that changed everything. "We should leave." Tern looked at her across the table. "Leave?" She nodded once. "Yes." A small breath escaped her lips. "Before this place turns us into people we don't recognize anymore." The room fell silent. And in that moment, for the first time in his career, Hale seriously considered walking away from the life he had always known. The small safe house sat at the edge of a quiet road outside Baltimore. Nothing about it looked unusual. A modest two-story house, white siding, a wooden porch with a single rocking chair that creaked whenever the wind passed through. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where nothing important ever happened. And that was exactly why Tern had chosen it. Inside, warm light spilled across the living room floor while rain tapped softly against the windows. Tern stood near the kitchen counter, slicing fresh apples into uneven pieces, not very skillfully. He paused, studying the knife for a second. "Well, that one's definitely too big," he muttered under his breath. Behind him, a quiet laugh drifted across the room. Saad sat on the couch with one hand resting gently on her stomach. 7 months pregnant, her dark curls were pulled loosely back, and the oversized sweater she wore stretched slightly across the round curve of her belly. "You know," she said, watching him carefully, "most people manage to cut apples without looking like they're defusing a bomb." Tern glanced over his shoulder. "I've handled bombs before." She replied softly. "That actually explains a lot." He carried the bowl over and placed it on the table in front of her. Sade picked up one slice and examined it thoughtfully. "You cut these like a nervous raccoon. That's oddly specific." "Well," she shrugged lightly, taking a bite. "I'm still eating them." Tern lowered himself into the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt comfortable, different from the constant tension that used to fill their lives. Outside, the rain continued tapping against the roof. Shad leaned back slowly, exhaling as she adjusted her position. The baby shifted gently. Tern noticed immediately. "You okay?" She nodded. A small pause. "She's just stretching." Tern leaned forward slightly. "You're sure it's a girl?" "That's what the doctor said." She smiled faintly. "And before you ask again, no, we are not naming her something tactical like Agent Baby." Tern huffed a quiet laugh. "Worth a suggestion." Said's expression softened as she watched him. "You know," she murmured after a moment, "you're different now." "How?" She tilted her head slightly. "Less guarded." Tern looked down at his hands. Maybe," he admitted. Another pause filled the room. Then Saad reached for his hand. Leaving that life behind was the right choice. He squeezed her fingers gently. "I know." Neither of them realized how fragile that piece really was. Because somewhere far away, people who had once worked beside them had already begun searching. And they were getting closer. It happened later that same night. The rain had stopped. The quiet around the safe house felt almost too still. Inside the bedroom upstairs, Saad had finally fallen asleep. One hand resting across her stomach, her breathing slow and steady. Tern sat downstairs near the window, flipping through a small notebook filled with planting schedules for the garden he planned to start in spring. A strange hobby for a man who used to travel with encrypted devices and hidden weapons. But the idea of growing something peaceful, it appealed to him. He had just turned a page when something made him pause. A sound, very faint, gravel shifting outside. Tern's eyes lifted toward the window. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. There it was again, a quiet crunch near the driveway. His body reacted instantly. The notebook closed silently. His chair slid back without making a sound. Tern stepped closer to the window and tilted the curtain slightly. Headlights, low, dim. A dark vehicle parked just beyond the edge of the property. His jaw tightened. No, he whispered under his breath. 2 figures stepped out of the car, then another, moving carefully, scanning the house. Professionals. Tern's stomach dropped. They had found him. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked softly. "Shad." He moved quickly to the staircase. "Shad," he whispered urgently. She appeared at the top of the stairs moments later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's wrong?" Tern didn't answer right away. He simply gestured toward the window. Her expression changed the moment she saw the car outside. "Oh." A quiet breath escaped her lips. "They found us." Tern nodded once. 3 shadows were already approaching the porch. Saad's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "Tern, I know," he said quietly. His voice carried the calm of someone who had faced danger many times before. But tonight felt different. Because tonight, he wasn't just protecting himself. He reached into a drawer near the staircase and pulled out a compact pistol. then handed Saad another one. She hesitated. Turn. I can't move as fast as before. I know. Another pause. Their eyes met. We only need to hold them long enough to get out, he said softly. Saad inhaled slowly, then nodded. All right. Outside, footsteps reached the porch. The door handle turned slightly. Someone tried it once. Locked. Then, a loud crash as the door burst open. The quiet life they had been building shattered in a single violent moment. The door burst open with a violent crack. Wood splintered across the floor. 3 men rushed inside. Black clothing, gloves, faces partially covered. They moved with a kind of coordination that immediately told Tern everything he needed to know. These were not random criminals. They were trained. Stay behind me, Tern whispered quickly. But the moment the first attacker spotted them at the staircase, the room exploded into motion. One man lunged forward. Tern reacted instantly. His arm came up. A sharp strike to the attacker's wrist. The weapon clattered across the floor. Another man rushed in from the side. Sade stepped back toward the wall, one hand instinctively shielding her stomach. Turn, she gasped. I see him. The fight turned chaotic. Furniture crashed aside. Boots scraped across the wooden floor. Tern drove his shoulder into the second attacker, forcing him back toward the kitchen counter. But a third man was already moving toward the stairs, toward Sade. No, Tern shouted. Sade tried to step away, but her balance shifted slightly. 7 months pregnant made sudden movements harder. The attacker reached her before she could reposition. His hand grabbed the front of her sweater. And then, he shoved her. Hard. Her body slammed against the wall before collapsing to the floor. The sound of her hitting the ground echoed sharply through the room. Sade cried out. A sharp, painful sound that cut straight through Tern. Ah! The attacker's hand moved again, this time grabbing her stomach roughly as he tried to pull her up. Pain flashed across her face. Turn. Tern's vision went red. He drove his elbow into the man he was fighting and twisted free. 2 steps. That was all it took. He slammed into the attacker, holding Saad with enough force to send both men crashing into the table. The wood cracked under the impact. The attacker lost his grip. Sade dropped back to the floor, but she didn't get up. She stayed there, breathing hard, her hand clutching her back. Turn, she whispered. Something in her voice made him freeze. That wasn't normal pain. That was deeper, sharp, wrong. The other attackers scrambled to their feet. But they hesitated for just a second when they saw the look on Tern's face, because the man standing in front of them now was no longer fighting to escape. He was fighting to protect his family, and that made him far more dangerous. The next few seconds moved in a blur. Tern stepped forward with controlled fury. One attacker swung wildly. Tern caught the arm, twisted sharply, and drove the man into the wall. Another rushed from the side. A quick strike to the ribs. A shove. The attacker stumbled backward across the floor. The third man looked at the others briefly. A silent signal passed between them. Then, they retreated, fast, out the broken door, back into the night. The engine of their vehicle roared to life outside. Tern didn't chase them. He didn't even look toward the door, because Sade's voice came again, soft, fragile. Turn. He turned instantly. She was still lying on the floor, one hand gripping her lower back, the other pressed against her stomach. Her breathing had changed, short, uneven. Turn. Something's wrong. He dropped to his knees beside her. What is it? Sade swallowed. Her face had gone pale. The baby. A small pause. Pain flashed through her expression. I think she's coming. Tern's heart stopped for half a second. What? Shad squeezed her eyes shut. Another wave of pain rolled through her body. Ah! Her hand gripped his sleeve tightly. My back. It hurts. Tern looked down quickly, then saw it. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to make his chest tighten. No, no, no. This was too early. 7 months. The baby wasn't ready. Sade gasped again. Turn. We need to go. He didn't hesitate. Carefully, very carefully, he lifted her from the floor. She winced sharply as he moved her. Sorry, he whispered. It's okay. Just hurry. Turn carried her outside. The cold night air hit his face as he rushed toward the car. His hands shook slightly while opening the passenger door. He helped her inside gently. Saad leaned back against the seat, breathing unevenly. Turn. I know. He closed the door quickly and ran around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed behind the tires as the car sped down the dark road. Inside the vehicle, Said gripped the edge of the seat. Turn. The baby. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. We're getting you to the hospital. Her breathing grew heavier. Another contraction hit. She cried out again. Turn. I'm here. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The quiet life they had tried to build was gone, and now the only thing that mattered was getting Sade and their child to the hospital before it was too late. The hospital doors burst open as Turn rushed inside carrying Said in his arms. Help! He shouted, his voice raw and breaking. My wife, she's in labor. The emergency room turned instantly alert. A nurse behind the desk jumped to her feet. Get a stretcher, now. 2 doctors hurried forward as Turn carefully lowered Said onto the rolling bed. She cried out again, gripping his hand tightly. Turn. I'm right here, he said quickly, brushing damp hair from her face. Her breathing had grown uneven. Short, shallow, the kind that told experienced medical staff something wasn't right. One doctor pressed a hand gently against her stomach. How far along? He asked quickly. 7 months, Turn answered. The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse. Premature delivery, he murmured. They began wheeling her down the hallway. Sir, you'll need to stay here, another nurse said firmly. But Turn shook his head immediately. No, I'm not leaving her. The nurse hesitated. Sade turned her head slightly toward them. Let him stay, she whispered weakly. The doctor nodded once. All right, but stay out of the way. They pushed the stretcher into the delivery room. Bright lights filled the space. Machines beeped softly as nurses moved quickly around the bed. Sade cried out again as another contraction hit her. Turn. He stepped closer, taking her hand carefully. I'm here. Her fingers tightened around his. Turn. Something feels wrong. He looked toward the doctor. The doctor was already checking her back carefully. Then his expression shifted. What is it? Turn asked. The doctor spoke quietly to the nurse beside him. Possible spinal trauma. Saad had been thrown hard against the wall during the attack, hard enough to injure her back. Now the damage was becoming clearer. Another contraction surged through her body. She gasped sharply. Ah! The doctor leaned closer. The baby is already descending. One nurse looked surprised. That fast? The doctor nodded. We don't have time to wait. He looked toward Saad. Listen carefully. We're going to deliver your baby right now. Sade nodded weakly. Turn squeezed her hand again. You're strong, he said softly. She managed a faint smile. Well, I married you, didn't I? Even in that moment, she tried to lighten the fear between them. Another contraction came. Her body tensed. Turn. I'm here. The doctor positioned himself at the foot of the bed. I need you to push. Shade shook her head slightly. My back. I can't feel my legs. The doctor spoke gently but firmly. You can do this. She looked at Turn. Fear flickered briefly across her face. Then determination replaced it. Okay. She took a slow breath. Then pushed. Pain ripped through her body. Her fingers dug into Turn's hand. Again. Another push. Minutes passed. Long, exhausting minutes. The room filled with quiet instructions from the medical staff. Almost there. One more push. Sade's breathing grew weaker with each contraction. But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because their child was almost here. Finally, a cry filled the room. Small, sharp, alive. The doctor lifted the tiny newborn carefully. "It's a girl." For a moment, the sound of that cry seemed to freeze everything else. Turn's breath caught in his chest. The baby's skin looked fragile and pale. Too small, too early. "She needs NICU," one nurse said quickly. They rushed the baby across the room towards specialized equipment, but Saad's eyes were already searching. "Is she okay?" she whispered. Turn looked toward the doctors. "She's breathing." He turned back to Saad. "You did it." Her lips curved slightly. "Good." Her hand relaxed in his. But something about the way her eyes drifted made his stomach tighten. "Saad?" The doctor glanced at the monitor. Then his face grew serious. "Her vitals are dropping." Turn looked at him. "What?" The doctor moved quickly. But Saad gently squeezed Turn's hand again, weakly. "Turn." He leaned closer. "I'm here." Her voice barely reached him now. "Take care of her." A small pause. "Promise me." Turn's throat tightened. "I promise." Her eyes softened. "I love you." Then her hand slowly slipped from his. The machine behind her gave a long, steady tone. The doctors moved quickly, but Turn already knew. The woman who had changed his entire life was gone. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. The hospital staff handled the formalities gently, but grief has its own kind of silence, and it settled around Turn like a heavy fog. The baby remained in the neonatal intensive care unit, tiny, fragile, wrapped in tubes and soft blankets. Turn visited every day. Sometimes he sat beside the incubator for hours without speaking, just watching. The nurses began noticing something about the baby. For someone born so early, she had strong lungs, very strong lungs. Whenever she cried, the sound echoed through the NICU. One nurse laughed softly one afternoon. "Well, listen to that." Another nurse smiled. "That baby hits like a hammer," and the nickname appeared almost instantly. Bam Bam. At first it was just a joke among the nurses, but the name stuck. Even Turn eventually began using it. Weeks passed. Slowly, the baby grew stronger. Her breathing improved. Her tiny fingers began gripping his thumb whenever he placed his hand inside the incubator. And for the first time since losing Saad, Turn felt something shift inside him. Not happiness. Not yet. But purpose. This little girl needed him. Completely. And that meant something important. The world he had once lived in could never reach her. One evening, a nurse approached him quietly. "She's strong enough to go home soon." Turn looked down at the tiny child sleeping in the incubator. Home. The word felt strange, but he had already decided where that home would be. Far away from cities. Far away from the intelligence world. Far away from anyone who might remember the name Hale. Several months later, a truck rolled slowly down a narrow country road in rural Kansas. Fields stretched wide in every direction. No tall buildings, no government offices, no shadows from the life he once knew. Just open land, quiet wind, and a small farmhouse waiting at the end of a dirt path. Inside the truck, Bam Bam slept peacefully in a child seat behind him. Turn parked near the porch and stepped out. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking at the house. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, and safe was all that mattered. He opened the back door carefully and lifted Bam Bam into his arms. She stirred slightly, then yawned. Her tiny hand grabbed his shirt. Turn walked slowly toward the house. The porch creaked beneath his weight. The door opened. Inside waited a simple living room, empty except for a couch and a wooden table. It was enough. More than enough. Turn looked down at his daughter. "Well," he murmured quietly. "Welcome home, Bam Bam." She blinked sleepily, then let out a small cry. Even then, Her voice carried that same powerful little shout that had made the nurses laugh weeks earlier. Tern smiled faintly, for the first time in a long while, and outside the farmhouse, the wind moved gently through the tall grass. The world had no idea where he had gone. No records, no signals, no trace. Just a man, a small farm, and a daughter he would protect with everything he had left. 5 years passed in that quiet place. 5 years of planting crops, fixing fences, reading bedtime stories, teaching Bam Bam how to count the stars above the fields, and for a while, it truly seemed like the past had finally lost his trail. But peace built on hiding rarely lasts forever. Because on a quiet evening 5 years later, a single gunshot would shatter that peaceful life, and a 5-year-old girl would run into a hospital screaming for help, the very moment where this story began. And the people who once hunted Tern Hale, they had finally found him again. The first thing Tern heard was the steady beeping of a machine. Slow, rhythmic, somewhere close to his ear. Beep, beep, beep. For a moment he didn't move, didn't open his eyes. His body felt heavy, like someone had tied invisible weights to his arms and legs. Then a dull ache spread across his ribs, sharp enough to pull a quiet groan from his throat. The sound barely escaped him, but someone noticed. A chair scraped softly beside the hospital bed. "Oh, hey, easy," a calm voice said gently. "Don't try to move too fast." Tern forced his eyes open. The room looked blurry at first. Bright lights overhead, white walls, medical monitors beside the bed. Hospital. His memory returned in fragments. The farm, fixing the fence, the sound of a gunshot, pain, then darkness. His head turned slightly, and that's when he saw her. A woman standing beside the bed, adjusting the IV line connected to his arm. Dark skin, sharp, intelligent eyes. Her posture carried quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of working in stressful environments. She noticed him looking. "Well," she said softly, "look who finally decided to wake up." Tern blinked slowly. His throat felt dry. "Where?" "Houston Medical Center," she replied. "You're lucky." His brow tightened slightly. "Lucky?" "Yeah." She folded her arms lightly. "That bullet missed your heart by about an inch." Tern absorbed that information silently. Then his eyes moved around the room again. Searching. "Where's my daughter?" The question came out rough, urgent. The nurse's expression softened. "She's okay." A quiet breath escaped his chest, but his eyes remained tense. "I want to see her." "Well," she said, glancing toward the door. "She's actually right outside." Almost on cue, the door creaked open, and Bam Bam peeked inside. Her curls bounced slightly as she rushed into the room. "Daddy." Tern's chest tightened instantly. "Hey." His voice cracked slightly. Bam Bam climbed carefully onto the chair beside the bed. Her small hands grabbed his arm. "You scared me," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. His fingers brushed gently across her hair. "You did good, though." She looked up at him. "I called 911 like you taught me." Tern nodded slowly. "You saved my life." The nurse watched the moment quietly from the corner of the room. But when Tern's eyes shifted back toward her, something changed. His expression hardened slightly. Suspicion. Years of surviving dangerous situations had trained his instincts well. And right now, his instincts were asking questions. "Who are you?" he asked. The nurse blinked once, then answered calmly. "Nellie." "Just Nellie?" She raised an eyebrow. "Well, Nurse Nellie, if you want the full title." Tern studied her carefully. "How long has she been here?" "Your daughter?" Nellie glanced toward Bam Bam. "Since the ambulance brought you in." A pause. "She refused to leave." Bam Bam nodded firmly. "I stayed with Miss Nellie." Tern's eyes shifted between them. Something about that bothered him. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the lingering paranoia from years of living carefully. but the thought appeared in his mind before he could stop it. Why would a nurse spend so much time with his child? His voice came out colder than he intended. You don't have other patients? Nellie blinked slowly. Excuse me? You've been babysitting my daughter for hours. Well, she replied carefully. She was scared and alone. That's not your job. The room grew quiet. Bam Bam looked between them, confused. Nellie's expression changed. Not anger exactly, but something close. She straightened slightly. My job, she said calmly, is taking care of people who need help. Tern held her gaze. And you expect me to believe you're doing this out of kindness? Bam Bam frowned. Daddy. But Nellie raised her hand gently to stop her. No, it's all right, she said softly. Then she turned back to Tern. You know what? A small breath left her nose. I've been on my feet for 10 hours trying to keep people alive. She gestured toward Bam Bam, and this little girl was terrified. Another pause. So yes, I stayed with her. Her voice hardened slightly. Because that's what decent human beings do. Tern didn't respond immediately. The tension between them hung in the air for a moment. Then he said something that immediately made Bam Bam's head snap up. People usually want something. Nellie stared at him. Wow. Her arms crossed again. That's what you think this is? Tern shrugged weakly against the pillows. I don't know you. Well, she replied sharply. I don't know you either. Another pause, but this one felt heavier, more personal. Nellie leaned forward slightly. But let me make one thing clear. Her eyes locked directly onto his. I'm not here for your money. Tern blinked. Yeah, she cut in. I've seen that look before. A small shake of her head followed. Men who think every woman helping them must have an agenda. Bam Bam looked confused again. What's agenda? Neither adult answered her. Nellie exhaled slowly. You were bleeding on the ground when you arrived here. She pointed toward the door. Your daughter saved your life. Then she tapped the clipboard in her hand. And I did my job. Another quiet moment passed. Then she stepped back. You should focus on recovering. She turned toward the door. But Bam Bam grabbed her hand quickly. Miss Nellie. Nellie paused. What is it, Bam Bam? The girl's voice came out small. You're still coming back tomorrow, right? Nellie hesitated. Just slightly. Then she smiled gently. Well. She glanced toward Tern. Then back at the child. I guess we'll see. And with that, she stepped out into the hallway. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the room, silence settled for a moment. Bam Bam looked up at her father. Daddy. Tern shifted slightly against the bed. Yeah? Why were you mean to her? The question landed harder than any accusation. Tern exhaled slowly. I wasn't mean. You kinda were. He rubbed his forehead with one hand. Years of distrust didn't disappear overnight, especially after someone had just tried to kill him. But Bam Bam looked genuinely upset. She helped me, the little girl said quietly. I know. She stayed with me all night. Tern looked toward the door. His expression softened slightly. Well, a long pause followed. Maybe I owe her an apology. Bam Bam nodded. You do? And somewhere out in the hallway, Nellie leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, exhaling slowly. She shook her head lightly. That man is exhausting. But despite the frustration in her voice, there was something else there too. Curiosity. Because something about Tern Hale didn't quite make sense. Farmers didn't usually get shot by trained snipers. And they definitely didn't carry the kind of quiet tension she had seen in his eyes. Whatever had happened on that farm, it wasn't simple, and whether Tern liked it or not, their lives were already beginning to cross paths in ways neither of them fully understood yet. Morning light slipped quietly through the hospital blinds. Soft, pale, the kind of light that usually signals the beginning of a peaceful day. But inside Tern's hospital room, the atmosphere felt heavy. He shifted slightly against the pillows. Immediately the pain in his ribs reminded him why he wasn't at home. The quiet groan slipped out before he could stop it. The bullet wound had been cleaned and stitched, but every movement still sent a dull ache spreading across his side. Tern exhaled slowly. Well, that's unpleasant. A small voice near the window answered. You're not supposed to move that much. Tern turned his head. Bam Bam sat in the chair beside the bed, swinging her legs back and forth while coloring something on a sheet of paper. Her tiny tongue poked out slightly in concentration. What are you drawing? He asked. She lifted the paper proudly. You. Tern squinted slightly. The drawing showed a stick figure lying on a hospital bed, with a large red circle around its ribs. Tern raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of blood. Bam Bam nodded seriously. You had a lot? He rubbed his forehead. Well, thanks for the honesty. The door opened quietly behind them. Nellie stepped into the room carrying a small clipboard. She paused when she saw Bam Bam proudly presenting the drawing. Oh wow, she said softly. That's very accurate. Bam Bam grinned. Right? Nellie glanced toward Tern. How are you feeling today? Tern hesitated. Just slightly. Last night's argument lingered awkwardly in the air between them, but he finally answered. Alive. That's a good start, she replied calmly. She stepped closer and checked the monitor beside the bed. Pain level? Manageable. She studied him for a moment. You're lying. Tern sighed. Well, it hurts. She made a note on the clipboard. Pain medication should kick in soon. Bam Bam looked up from the chair. Miss Nellie. Yes? Daddy said he owes you an apology. Tern blinked. Bam Bam. But the child crossed her arms stubbornly. You said that... Nellie looked at him. One eyebrow raised slightly. Well? Tern shifted carefully against the pillows. Look. A small pause. I've had a complicated life. Nellie leaned lightly against the wall. So I gathered. And when someone tries to kill you, he continued slowly, you start questioning everyone. Another pause. But Bam Bam's right. He exhaled quietly. I shouldn't have snapped at you. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then Nellie nodded. Apology accepted. Bam Bam clapped once. Good. Tern chuckled softly despite the pain. Maybe things between them weren't completely broken after all. The following days passed slowly. Recovery always did. Tern spent most of his time resting while doctors monitored his progress carefully. But Bam Bam? Well, Bam Bam refused to leave the hospital. Every morning she appeared beside Nellie during the early shift, and every afternoon she followed her through the hallways like a tiny shadow. One afternoon, Nellie sat at the nurse's station reviewing charts when Bam Bam climbed onto the chair beside her. What are you doing? The girl asked. Paperwork. That looks boring. It is. Bam Bam leaned closer to the clipboard. You write a lot. Nellie laughed quietly. That's part of the job. A pause followed. Then Bam Bam rested her chin on the desk. Miss Nellie. Do you have kids? Nellie blinked. The question caught her off guard. Well, she hesitated. No. Bam Bam thought about that, then nodded slowly. You're really good with kids, though. Nellie smiled faintly. Thank you. Another quiet moment passed. Then Bam Bam spoke again. You know what I like about you? What's that? You listen. Nellie looked down at her. That's important. Bam Bam nodded seriously. Some grown-ups don't listen. Nellie chuckled softly. That's very true. The little girl suddenly brightened. Oh, I almost forgot. She pulled something from her pocket. A folded piece of paper. My drawing from yesterday. Nellie opened it carefully. This one showed 3 stick figures. One tall, one medium, one small. Nellie pointed to them. Let me guess. That's Daddy. And that's me. Nellie tapped the 3rd figure. And this one? Bam Bam smiled. That's... Nellie blinked. Oh, the girl shrugged casually. It's because you're part of our team now. Something about that sentence made Nellie's chest tighten slightly. Your team. Yeah. Bam Bam nodded proudly. Team Bam Bam. Nellie laughed. Well, I'm honored. But as she folded the drawing again, a quiet thought lingered in her mind. This little girl already trusted her completely, and trust like that wasn't something you could take lightly. A week later, the doctor stood at the end of Turn's bed reviewing his chart. "Well," he said, closing the file, "you're healing well." Turn looked up. "That's good news." "It is." The doctor nodded toward the window. "But no heavy work for at least another month." Turn sighed. "I run a farm. You run it slowly for now." Turn leaned back against the pillows. "Guess I don't have much choice." The doctor smiled slightly. "Nope." A few minutes later, Bam Bam burst into the room. "Daddy." "Yeah?" "Miss Nellie says you're leaving today. That's what they tell me." The girl jumped excitedly. "Does that mean we're going home?" "Yes." She turned toward Nellie, who stood near the door. "You're coming too, right?" Nellie blinked. What?" "Our house," Bam Bam said simply. "You should come see it." Nellie laughed nervously. "Well, I don't think your dad invited me." Both of them looked at Turn. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Well," a pause. "I guess, if you want to." Nellie raised an eyebrow. "That enthusiastic, huh?" "I'm recovering," he said defensively. "Excitement hurts." Bam Bam grabbed Nellie's hand. "Please." Nellie sighed softly. "Well." She looked between them. "I suppose one visit wouldn't hurt." Bam Bam cheered. "Yay." Turn watched the two of them quietly. Something strange settled in his chest. Not discomfort, not suspicion. Something else. Something warmer. For 5 years it had been just him and Bam Bam. Just the two of them against the world. But watching his daughter laugh beside Nellie, for the first time in a long while, the farmhouse waiting out in Kansas didn't feel quite so empty anymore. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new had quietly entered their lives. But none of them realized yet how quickly that fragile peace would be shattered again. The drive out to the farm took nearly 2 hours. Long stretches of open land rolled past the windows of Nellie's car, golden fields swaying gently under the wide Kansas sky. She had expected something different, something bigger, maybe. But when the dirt road finally curved toward Turn's property, the farmhouse looked simple, quiet, a wooden porch, a faded red barn sitting a short distance away, tall grass dancing lazily in the wind. Nellie slowed the car as Bam Bam bounced excitedly in the passenger seat. "We're here. We're here. I can see that," Nellie said with a soft laugh. The car rolled to a stop near the porch. Before the engine even finished shutting off, Bam Bam had already pushed the door open. "Daddy," she shouted, running toward the yard. Turn looked up from the fence he had been repairing. Even injured, he insisted on working slowly around the property. He leaned slightly on the hammer in his hand as Bam Bam ran into his arms. "Easy," he murmured, lifting her carefully. "Doctor said no tackling." She giggled. "Sorry." Turn's eyes shifted toward the car. Nellie stepped out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face as she looked around the property. "Well," she exhaled softly. "This is peaceful." Turn nodded once. "That's the idea." A brief pause passed between them. Not awkward, just unfamiliar. Then Bam Bam grabbed Nellie's hand. "Come see the chickens." Before Nellie could respond, the girl was already pulling her toward the small coop behind the house. Turn followed slowly, shaking his head slightly. For a while the afternoon unfolded quietly. Bam Bam showed Nellie everything. The chickens, the vegetable garden, the small swing hanging from a tree branch. Nellie laughed more in that single afternoon than she had during weeks of hospital shifts. At one point, she glanced toward Turn as Bam Bam ran ahead. "You built all this?" He shrugged slightly. "Took time." "Well," she said, looking around the wide-open fields. "You did a good job." Turn didn't answer immediately, but something in his expression softened. For the first time in years, the farm didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a home. Later that afternoon, Bam Bam grabbed a small woven basket from the kitchen table. "Come on," she said excitedly. "Come where?" Nellie asked. "Berry field." Nellie looked toward Tern. "There's a berry field?" He nodded toward the far edge of the property. Wild bushes grow near the tree line. Bam Bam was already halfway to the door. "Come on," Nellie laughed. "Well, I guess we're going berry picking." Tern watched them head toward the field. "You two stay where I can see you," he called out. Bam Bam waved dramatically. "We will." The grass brushed softly against their legs as they walked through the field. The late afternoon sun stretched warm across the land. Birds drifted lazily across the sky. Nellie crouched beside a low bush covered in dark berries. "Oh wow," she said quietly. "These look good." Bam Bam dropped to her knees beside her. "You have to check first." "Check what?" "For bugs." Nellie laughed. "That's good advice." They began filling the baskets slowly, berry after berry. Every few seconds, Bam Bam popped one into her mouth. "You're supposed to put them in the basket," Nellie reminded her. "I am. You're eating them. Quality control." Nellie shook her head, smiling. A breeze passed gently through the trees nearby. The moment felt calm, easy. For the first time since meeting Tern, Nellie allowed herself to relax completely. She stood and looked back toward the farmhouse in the distance. Tern leaned against the porch railing, watching them. Protective, always watching. She understood that about him now. Life had taught him to stay alert. But standing there in the warm sunlight, watching Bam Bam laugh among the berry bushes, even he looked calmer, almost peaceful. And for a brief moment, it felt like everything might finally be settling into something good. But peace can disappear quickly, sometimes with only a single sound. And that sound was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The basket was nearly half full now. Bam Bam crouched beside another bush, carefully plucking berries one by one. "Look," she said proudly. "I found a big one." Nellie leaned closer. "Well, that one might actually be worth eating." Bam Bam popped it into her mouth immediately. "Yep. Very good." Nellie laughed softly and reached toward another branch. The air around them felt calm, quiet, too quiet. Somewhere far away a crow called once, then went silent. Nellie straightened slightly, brushing dirt from her hands. For a brief moment, something in her chest tightened. A strange feeling. Not fear exactly, just a flicker of unease she couldn't explain. She glanced toward the farmhouse. Tern was still leaning against the porch railing, watching, always watching. Then, crack! The sound shattered the quiet field like a piece of glass breaking. Nellie felt something slam violently into her arm. Ah! The basket dropped from her hands. Berries scattered across the grass. Her body stumbled backward. Pain exploded through her upper arm, hot and blinding. "What?" She collapsed onto one knee. Her hand instinctively clutched the wound. Blood began soaking through the sleeve of her shirt almost instantly. Bam Bam froze, eyes wide. "Miss Nellie?" Another echo of the gunshot rolled faintly across the distant hills. From the porch, Tern straightened immediately. His voice carried across the field. "Bam Bam." Nellie tried to stand, but the pain shot through her arm again. "Stay down," she shouted. But Bam Bam had already turned toward the house. "Daddy." Nellie grabbed her sleeve quickly. "No." Too late. Because the grass behind them suddenly shifted. Footsteps. Fast, heavy. And they weren't coming from the farmhouse. They were coming from the trees. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, dressed in dark clothing, faces hidden. Their movements quick, controlled, professional. Nellie's heart dropped instantly. Not random attackers. They knew exactly what they were doing. One of the men moved forward quickly. Nellie forced herself up halfway despite the pain. "Stay away from her." Her voice shook slightly, but she planted herself between the man and Bam Bam. The attacker barely slowed. He shoved her aside with a single rough push. Nellie crashed back into the grass, pain ripping through her injured arm. "Ah!" Bam Bam screamed. "Miss Nellie!" Another man grabbed the little girl around the waist. She kicked wildly. "Let me go." Nellie struggled to stand again. Her vision blurred slightly from the pain. "Stop!" But the third man stepped forward and pressed something cold against her shoulder. "A gun." "Don't," he said quietly. Nellie froze. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she stared at the weapon. Across the field, Tern was already running toward them. Fast, but still too far away. The man holding Bam Bam lifted her easily. She cried out again. "Daddy!" The masked leader turned toward Tern briefly. Even from the distance, Tern could see the cold calculation in the man's posture. Then the man spoke. His voice carried clearly across the field. "Tell him..." A short pause followed. "The past isn't finished." The words landed like a hammer. The attackers moved quickly after that. Within seconds, they disappeared back into the trees, with Bam Bam struggling in the man's arms. The engine of a hidden vehicle roared somewhere beyond the hill. Then silence returned. Tern reached the field moments later. Too late. He dropped to his knees beside Nellie. "Where is she?" Nellie winced, gripping her bleeding arm. "They took her." Tern's chest heaved. "Who?" Her voice came out shaky. "They said..." A breath. "The past isn't finished." The moment those words left her mouth, something changed in Tern's expression. The calm farmer, who had spent 5 years hiding from the world, disappeared, and the man who replaced him looked far more dangerous. For several seconds, the field remained completely still. The wind moved softly through the grass. A few berries rolled slowly across the dirt where the basket had fallen. But Tern didn't notice any of that. His eyes stayed locked on the empty tree line where the vehicle had vanished. His chest rose and fell heavily. Once, twice, 3 times. "Nellie," he said quietly. Her breathing was uneven as she held her injured arm tightly against her side. I'm okay." But he didn't look at her yet. "Did you see their faces?" She shook her head slowly. "Masks." A short pause. "They moved like professionals." That answer settled into Tern's mind like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Professionals, not random criminals, not desperate thieves. People who knew exactly where he lived, and exactly who they were taking. His jaw tightened. "They said something," he murmured. Nellie nodded weakly. "Yeah." Her voice came out quieter now. "They told me to tell you." A small breath escaped her lips. "The past isn't finished." The moment those words reached him, Tern finally moved. He stood slowly, not rushed, not panicked, just deliberate. Something had changed in his posture. The man who had spent years repairing fences and feeding chickens seemed to fade away, and the man who replaced him carried a different kind of presence. Controlled, focused, dangerous. Nellie noticed it immediately. "Tern." He turned toward her. His voice was calm now. Too calm. "How bad is the arm?" She glanced down at the wound. "Through the muscle." "You can move your fingers?" She flexed them slowly. "Yeah, good." He nodded once, then looked back toward the trees. "They didn't come here for money. No, they came for leverage." Nellie swallowed. "Your daughter?" "Yes." Another silence passed, but this one carried a heavier weight, because both of them understood the same thing now. This wasn't over. Not even close. And whoever had taken Bam Bam had just made a very serious mistake. Tern moved quickly now, not running, but purposeful. Every step carried the quiet urgency of someone who understood exactly how little time they had. Nellie followed a few steps behind, pressing her injured arm against her side. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The barn." The red wooden structure stood behind the farmhouse, its doors slightly weathered from years of wind and rain. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary. Storage for tools, feed, farm equipment. Tern pushed the door open. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, sunlight filtered through the wooden slats in narrow beams. Dust drifted lazily in the air. A tractor sat near the back wall. Several shelves held jars, tools, and spare parts. Nothing unusual. Nellie frowned slightly. "Tern." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked directly toward the far corner of the barn. His hand reached beneath a wooden workbench. There was a faint click. The floor shifted. Not loudly. Just enough for a narrow section of boards to lift slightly. Nellie blinked. "Wait." Tern pulled the hidden panel open. Beneath it sat a reinforced metal case. Old, heavy, locked. He knelt and entered a short code into the keypad. The latch opened with a soft metallic snap. Inside the case were several items carefully arranged in foam padding. Handguns, a compact rifle, 2 encrypted communication devices, and a thin black folder filled with documents. Nellie stared. "You're a farmer, huh?" Tern picked up one of the radios and powered it on. "That's the cover." Her eyebrows rose. "The cover?" He checked the battery levels quickly, then looked toward her. "You asked me once why someone would try to kill a man fixing a fence." Nellie nodded slowly. "Well," he continued quietly, "this is why." He opened the black folder. Inside were old photographs, surveillance images, mission briefings, names, places, operations, fragments of the life he thought he had left behind. Nellie's voice dropped slightly. "Tern." But he had already started assembling the rifle. His movements were smooth, automatic, muscle memory, from years of training returning instantly. "They took my daughter," he said calmly. Nellie watched him carefully. The quiet man she had met in the hospital was gone. In his place stood someone far more dangerous. "And now," Tern added softly, "I'm going to take her back." The barn fell quiet again. Dust floated lazily through thin beams of sunlight while Tern worked. The rifle rested against the bench now. The encrypted radio hummed softly as it powered up. Nellie leaned against the wooden support beam, still pressing her injured arm carefully against her side. Her eyes followed every movement he made. "You've done this before," she said quietly. Tern didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slipped a small earpiece into his ear and adjusted the radio frequency. Static crackled briefly, then faded. "A few times," he replied. His voice carried no pride, just fact. Nellie watched him carefully. The calm precision in his movements told her something important. This wasn't improvisation. This was familiarity. Years of it. "What kind of life were you living before the farm?" she asked. Tern's fingers paused over the device. For a moment, it looked like he might ignore the question. Then he exhaled quietly. The kind that makes enemies. The radio beeped softly. Connection established. He pressed the transmit button. For several seconds, he said nothing, just listened, then finally spoke. "Hale." Static filled the silence that followed. Then a voice answered, low. "Careful. I thought you were dead." Tern glanced toward the barn door briefly. "Not yet." A pause came from the other side. Then the voice returned. "You know this line shouldn't exist anymore." "I know." Another pause. "What do you want?" Tern's jaw tightened. "My daughter's been taken." The voice on the radio went quiet for a long moment. Then, "Who?" "Old organization." A sharp breath crackled through the speaker. "That's not good." "No," Tern said calmly. "It isn't." The voice lowered further. "If they found you after all this time, It means someone high up still cares. I figured, do you know who? Not yet. The man on the radio hesitated, then finally spoke again. I'll send what I can. Do that. And Hale. Yes? The voice paused. Be careful. Tern ended the transmission without replying. He already knew the risk, because the moment he turned that radio on, the quiet life he built for Bam Bam had officially ended. Nellie watched him carefully as he powered down the radio. You just told someone you're alive, she said. Yes. And that's safe? No. She blinked. Well, at least you're honest. Tern slid the radio back into the case and picked up one of the pistols. He checked the chamber quickly, loaded, then secured it at his waist. Nellie shifted her weight against the beam. You're going after them tonight. It wasn't a question. Tern shook his head slightly. Not yet. Why not? Because charging blindly gets people killed. Another pause. I need information first. Nellie nodded slowly. That voice on the radio. Who was that? Someone who owes me. She studied him for a moment. You trust him? Enough. The wind outside pushed gently against the barn doors. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, Nellie stepped forward. What do you need from me? Tern looked up. Her injured arm hung stiffly at her side, blood still staining the sleeve of her shirt. You need a hospital. I'll survive. That's not the point. Her voice grew firmer. Tern. He met her eyes. I was there when they took Bam Bam. A pause. I'm not sitting on the sidelines. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he reached for a small medical kit sitting on the bench. Sit. She frowned slightly. What? Sit down. Nellie sighed and lowered herself onto a wooden crate. Tern carefully cleaned the wound in her arm. She winced slightly. Easy. Sorry. A few seconds passed while he wrapped the bandage tightly around her arm. Finally, she asked quietly, You're really going to find her, aren't you? Tern tied the bandage securely, then stepped back. Yes. Nellie studied his face carefully. How can you be so sure? He looked toward the open barn doors, toward the endless fields beyond. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. Because the people who took Bam Bam. A small pause followed. Just woke up the one man they should have left alone. Outside, the sun began dipping toward the horizon. And somewhere far away, a frightened little girl waited. But the people holding her didn't realize something important yet. They hadn't just taken a child. They had declared war on the man who loved her most. Night settled slowly over the farm. The sky turned deep orange first, then purple, then finally dark. Inside the barn, a single hanging bulb swayed gently above Tern as he worked. Metal clicked softly against metal while he checked the rifle one more time. Nellie sat on a wooden crate nearby, her bandaged arm resting carefully against her side. You move like someone who's done this 100 times, she said quietly. Tern didn't look up. More than that. She watched him for a moment. You never told me what kind of work you used to do. Another pause. Tern slid a magazine into the rifle and locked it in place. Things that don't belong on resumes. Nellie huffed softly. Well, that clears everything up. The small radio on the table suddenly beeped. Both of them froze. Tern reached for it immediately. The speaker crackled. Then the same voice from earlier returned. Hale. Tern lifted the radio. I'm here. The man on the other side sounded tense. You're not going to like this. When do I ever? A pause. Then the voice lowered. I tracked the vehicle that left your farm. Tern's eyes sharpened. Where? Heading east. Another small burst of static followed, toward an old industrial zone outside St. Louis. Nellie straightened slightly. That's hours away. Tern didn't respond. The man on the radio continued. There's something else. What? That location used to belong to your old organization. The words hung in the air. Turn's jaw tightened. Used to? Yeah. The voice sounded uneasy now. They shut that place down years ago. So why go there? Another pause came through the speaker. That's the part I can't figure out. Turn looked toward the open barn door. The night air moved quietly across the fields. They're setting something up. Maybe. The man on the radio exhaled slowly. Hale, if they brought your daughter there. Yes? Then this isn't just a kidnapping. Turn already knew that. He didn't answer. Instead, he ended the transmission. The truck engine rumbled quietly as Turn pulled onto the empty highway. The farm faded behind them. Miles of dark road stretched ahead. Nellie glanced out the passenger window. You're really driving straight into their territory. Yes, that seems risky. Turn kept his eyes on the road. Everything about this is risky. She studied his face carefully. You're not scared. He shook his head slightly. No, well. She leaned back in the seat. Someone should be. The headlights cut across long stretches of highway as the truck sped through the night. After several minutes, Nellie spoke again. Tell me something. What? If these people were dangerous enough to hunt you down after all these years. A pause. Why would they take Bam Bam instead of killing you? Turn didn't answer right away. The truck passed beneath a highway sign. The words, Saint Louis, 92 miles flashed briefly in the headlights. Finally he spoke. Because they want something. From you? Yes. And Bam Bam is leverage. Exactly. The weight of that truth settled quietly between them. After another mile, Nellie asked softly, You ever think about what happens if we're too late? Turn's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. But his voice stayed calm. We won't be miles away. Inside a dim concrete room, Bam Bam sat on a metal chair. Her small hands were tied loosely in front of her. A single overhead light flickered faintly above. She sniffed quietly, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. The door creaked open. One of the masked men stepped inside. He removed the cloth covering his face, not smiling, not angry, just studying her carefully. You're brave, he said. Bam Bam didn't answer. The man crouched slightly. Most kids would be screaming by now. She finally spoke. My daddy is coming. The man chuckled softly. Oh, we know. He stood again. That's the whole point. Bam Bam frowned. What does that mean? The man walked toward the door. You'll see. Then he stepped outside again, leaving the girl alone in the flickering light. But, despite everything, Bam Bam whispered the same words again. My daddy will find me. The truck slowed as it approached the outskirts of the industrial district. Old factories rose like dark skeletons against the horizon. Most of the buildings looked abandoned. Broken windows, rusting gates, silent parking lots. Turn pulled the truck behind a crumbling warehouse and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. Nellie looked around. Well, she exhaled slowly. This place looks friendly. Turn stepped out of the truck. His eyes scanned the buildings carefully. Every shadow, every rooftop, every dark window. Finally, he pointed toward a large concrete structure at the far end of the street. That one. Nellie followed his gaze. You're sure? No. He opened the back of the truck and removed the rifle. But it's the kind of place they'd use. She stepped beside him. So, what's the plan? Turn studied the building again, then said quietly, We find a way inside. A cold wind swept through the empty street. Metal clanged somewhere in the distance. And for the first time since leaving the farm, Turn hesitated, just slightly, because something about the building didn't feel right. Like someone was expecting him, waiting, watching. Then suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on the ground beside his boot. Nellie froze. Turn. He saw it too, slowly, very slowly. He looked up toward the roof, but the rooftop remained completely dark. Then a voice echoed from somewhere above. Well, The voice sounded calm, almost amused. It took you long enough to get here. Turn's grip tightened on the rifle, and the voice spoke again. Welcome back, Hale. But the person speaking was someone Tern never expected to hear again. And that realization sent a chill through him, because if that voice was real, then everything he thought he knew about this situation was wrong to him. Because if that voice was real, then everything he thought he knew about this situation was wrong.
If you enjoy American Love Stories, please consider subscribing and comment what you need next. And love you all from Mr. Austin.